Shlomo told me he was coming.
All right,
All right.
we'll start up, and when he gets here, he gets here. Today's daf is Masechta Gittin Daf Ayin Tes. We will begin from Daf Ayin Ches Omid Beis over here by opposite the Toises Va'at, and the line begins Amalei Shmuel Rav Yehuda. So what we're discussing over here is there was a concept that if the man and the woman are on a Shusarabim, they're on Queens Boulevard, right? So nobody is in their chutzner, and the man throws the get document. So the Mishnah says if it's closer to her, if it reaches close to her, she's mugareshes. If the document is more closer to him, so then she's not mugareshes. And if it's in between, so then you have a suffix. Now, what does it mean close to her? So we had so far two pshatim, what it means. Number one, if it gets into her 4 amas, because a man is kaina, a person is kaina, he owns, even though he's in Rishus Harabim, anything in a square 8 amas around him is considered his space, even though he's in a Rishus Harabim. So therefore, if it lands within her dalat amas, then it's close to her, she's mugareshes. If it doesn't, then it's considered close to him, and she's not mugareshes. That's the opinion of the first opinion that we said. That's what means karav loy. Others learn that the other pshat is, I think this was Rabbi Yochanan, he learned that no, karav loy could be that even if it's 100 amas away from her, it still can be close. It's still she could be mugareshes as long as he can't get to it. For example, let's say there's a channel of water dividing the man and the woman. So the man throws the get to the other side of the channel, and it's hard to cross this channel. So even though it might be closer to the man, and let's say it's 100 amas away from the woman, but the woman could guard the get because she has in her eyesight, she can see where the get is. So even if it's 100 amas away, as long as the man can no longer watch the get, that's considered close to her. So that is a new concept of what means karav law. Now the Gemara gives a third explanation. So here we go. Amalei Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel said to Rabbi Yehuda, Shinina, my sharp one. That Rabbi Yehuda is called the sharp one. It means what's close to her. It has to be so super close. She can bend and take it. In other words, that's what means close. Other than that, if it's a foot away from her, that's not. It has to be so close it's landing right by her foot. Other than that, she's not mugareshes. And then Shmuel added, don't rely on this. You should not paskin that it's a good get. The man, no matter how angry he is at his wife, gives the get into her hand. We can't rely on this, landing by her feet. Amalei Rav Mordechai Rabashi. Rav Mordechai said to Rabashi, there was a story, there was a story that a woman got the get, it landed by her feet. So really, technically, it's a good get. But they were machmir to say she's not mugareshes, and therefore she required a chalitza from the brother. Her former husband died, and they required a chalitza as if she's not mugareshes. And that's what we do today. We demand that a get be given over into the hand of the woman. The Mishnah says that if a man throws the money of the kedushin, and if it's close to him, then it's not a kedushin. If it lands really close to her, she's mukudeshes. Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rav Yochanan, legitin amru. This idea of landing close to him and close to her is enough. Is only said by the mitzvah of gittin, but not by any other concept in the Torah. So the Gemara says, Eisvei, Rab Abba Rabasis, Rab Abba jumped all over Rabasi. It says in our Mishnah, V'chein le'inyan kedushin. It works le'inyan kedushin. So what are you telling me that it doesn't work only by gittin? Answers the Gemara, Shani Hasham Deksiv V'yatzav Haisa. V'yatzav Haisa means that whatever applies by gittin applies by kedushin, and therefore that's when we say gittin, it means everything that's compared to gittin. Okay, hi Lewis. We're on Ayin Chesam and Beis. We're almost by the bottom. Eisvei, we learned, and we have a question. You're telling me that this karav law business doesn't apply by anywhere else, only by Gittin and Kedushin, v'chein linyan chov. We learned that it applies even by paying a debt. For example, a lender said, "Zroik li chayvi," throw me the money that you owe me. Uzrakale, and the borrower threw it to him. Karev lamavet lands very close to the lender zacha hamalva. Then the malva gets it because it's very close to the lender. Karev laloivif, very close to the borrower. Haloivachayev. Then it's as if the borrower did not pay back the money because it landed too close to him. If it's half and half, then they divide up in case something happens to that money till the lender gets it into his hands. What do you see? The bottom line is that this idea of karev law applies even by paying back a debt. So what are you telling me not so? Here we're talking about the Amalei. The guy said, the lender said to the borrower, if you just throw me the debt, if you throw me the money, you're finished. You don't have to pay me back. So the Gemara says that that's the case of our Mishnah. What is the novelty of that? He made a specific condition that if you throw me and it lands right near me, I consider it as if you paid back. So what's the novelty of the Mishnah? To Amalei, the lender actually said the following: throw me my debt, whatever you owe me, the money that you owe me, b'taris gittin, and we'll consider it like the halachas of gittin. So this is like the halachas of gittin apply to the halachas of lending, and therefore we consider it. We go with the dinim of karev law and karev law. So what is the novelty of that? He said we should follow the laws of gittin. Mahu the same. I would have thought a man he would have said the lender is saying to the borrower, "I'm fooling around with you," and that I don't really mean that if it lands next to my foot, it's as if you paid me back. I am just fooling around with you. And really, we should require the borrower that he's responsible still for the money as long as it did not get into the hands of the lender. Kamash Milan, so it teaches you that if the lender said the following, then we follow the laws of Gittin, and therefore we go with the din of Karev Loy and Karev Law. New Gemara. Amar Rav Chizda said, get biyada. A man has a get in the get, he gave it over to her in hand, but he's a magician. Umashicha biyada, he has a rope in his hand to pull the get out of her. If it's a rope that he can successfully pull it out of her hand, so then he's still tied to her. She's not divorced because he has to totally sever himself from the get, and therefore there should be no way for him to call it back. If he can't do that, for example, the string would break, then mugareshes, she's divorced. My tama, what's the reason for this halacha? Being a krisis v'leka, we need that him to be totally severed from her, and if he could still yo-yo back the get, then he's not completely severed from her, and that's not a good get. Amar Rav Yehuda said, if her hand was bent over, she kept her hand palm out. So if you throw something into her hand, it slides off. So even if you had a perfect shot and he threw the get right into her hands, she's not divorced. So the Gemara asks, Amai, why shouldn't it be divorced? Even if it falls off into her hands, it's falling, where is it falling? Into her 4 amas, right in front of her body. So therefore, it's in her domain. So therefore, she should be mugareshes. Answers the Gemara, but noch. It didn't actually fall to the ground. What happened was a wind came, let's say, and blew it away. So it never really landed on the ground in front of her. So the Gemara says, "Visigorish ma'avir da'abamas." Let it be. She should have a divorce because it was in at one time in the airspace of the 4 amas before the wind blew it. Tifshet the boy Rabbi Loza. We can solve the question of Rabbi Loza. He asked the question: Arba amas she'omru. If this person has 4 amas that belong to him in Rishus Rabim, Yeshlam Aver, do we consider the airspace as also belonging to him, or ein lehem aver? We don't consider the airspace. It's just the ground itself belongs to him. Tifshet the ein lehem aver. We should solve the dilemma by saying there is no airspace because the fact that the get appeared at 1 minute before the wind blew it into the airspace of this Dalat Amis, we say she's not mugareshes. Answers the Gemara, here we're talking about that Her hand is open, it slides off her hand, and she's standing by a river. By Medes al Gav Hanahar. She's standing by the river. As soon as it slides off her hand, it ends up in a river. The Mikara Leibit Kari, as soon as it slides off her hand, it was going to get lost anyway. So that's not considered a get, and that's why she's not Mugareshes. Ayin Tes, Amar Aleph, top of the page, the Mishnah. Hoysa Oimedes al Rosh Hagag. She was standing on a roof that belonged to her. Okay, let's learn that way. The roof belonged to her. And he's on the bottom in the Chatzer. Okay, and the man who's Rokila, and he threw the get up to the the roof. So the Mishnah says, Kevan Shehigila Avir Hagag, as soon as the get reaches the airspace of the roof, Harezu Mugreshes, she becomes divorced. Once it reaches that airspace on the roof, even though it did not land, she's divorced. And therefore, what would happen if before it landed, let's say it rained, and the whole get got splashed with a soaking rain and it got erased. She's Mugareshes because it reached the airspace of the roof. Now the opposite case. Hu milmala. He's on the roof. He owns the roof. The he milmata, and she's on the chatzer in the courtyard, right? And she owns the chatzer. Uzrakila, and he threw it to her. So Kaven Shiyatzim Rishus Agag, as soon as it's released from the domain of the roof and it lands, it's in the airspace of the courtyard. Since she owns the courtyard, in this case again, Nimchak, here the Mishnah adds it. If it suddenly got erased in the mid-ear, how does something get erased in mid-ear? So I'm imagining a thunderstorm that splashed a lot of rain on this get. Or Nisraf, of it got burnt while it's flying in the air as it's landing. So, but it was already in the airspace of the Chatzer. Harezu Mugareshes, she becomes divorced. Asks the Gemara on the first case of the Mishnah. You're telling me she's standing on the roof, and as soon as it reaches the airspace of the roof, even if it didn't land, she's divorced already, and I don't care if the get lands or doesn't land. She's divorced. So Gemara asks the question: imagine the get flying on top of a roof, and you expect it to land on the roof. So, but the v'halai mintar, but it's not being guarded. In other words, a wind could easily blow the get off the airspace of the roof. So, if it's not being watched, that's not a good chotzer. A chotzer means that it can actually stay in that chotzer. And here, because of the windy situation of the roof, it potentially could be blown away. And even if it's not blown away, we still need something that it could potentially land on the roof, and there's a high probability that's going to be blown away. Ama Rav Yehuda Shmuel, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, "Begag sheyesh limayka askinam." We're talking about a roof that has a gate around it. Oh, so once it lands in the gate, even if a wind comes, it's not going to blow it off the roof, the airspace of the roof. Therefore, that's why she's Mugareshes even before it lands. Ula ba Menashe mishmei Davime Omar. Ula, the son of Menashe, said, he says, even if there's no gate around the roof, hacha, here we're talking about bepachas mishloisha samuch legag askinam. That when does she become Mugareshes? As soon as it's in the 3 tvachim off the ground, off the roof, 3 tvachim within the roofs. So then, the chol hapachas mishloisha samach legag kegag dami. Anything within the 3 tvachim space close to the roof, it's considered part of the roof. We have this in Masech Sukkah, like Lavud. So therefore, that's what the Mishnah means. Not if it's high up in the airspace, she's Mugareshes, but it has to land so close to the ground, already 3 tvachim off the ground or less. That's when she becomes Mugareshes. Now the Gemara Mishnah, we're dealing with the other part of the Mishnah. Hu milmala, if he's on top, he owns the roof and he's on top, and she's on the bottom. So the Mishnah says, as soon as it gets into the airspace of the chatzer, she's Mugareshes. So now that's usually roofs are higher than the chatzer, right? So when he throws it off the roof, v'halei mintar, it's not being watched. A wind could easily come and blow the get away, far away. So why are you saying that when it gets into the airspace of the chatzer, she's divorced? Answers the Gemara. Amar Rav Yehuda Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says, "Kegoin shoy mechitzas atachtoinis oitfis al hoel yoinis." the surrounding mechitza around the chotzer is higher than the gate around the roof. I'm going to show you the picture on the screen over here. Here is the perfect picture. You have the picture, you have the chotzer, and it's an enclosed chotzer with a wall around it, and it's higher than the house and the roof. So therefore, when the guy throws it off, when he throws it off the roof, it's already in the airspace of the chotzer, which is surrounded by another wall. That's what Rabbi Laza answered, and everybody liked that answer. Ula said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, our Mishnah is talking about the outer mechitza over is higher than the mechitza that's on the roof. Amalei Rab Abba Leula. Come on, who holds like that? Would you say that who would be the author of our Mishnah? To Rebbe. Wouldn't you say our Mishnah goes according to Rebbe? The Amar Rebbe said, Kluta kamisha huncha damya. If something is in the airspace of something, we consider it as if it's resting. Rebbe has an opinion in Masechta Shabbos. Let's say you throw something from one Rishus Harabim into the other Rishus Harabim. You didn't throw Dalar Amas, you threw from one Rishus Harabim into another Rishus Harabim, but there's a Rishus Hayachid in the middle. So we consider it as if the object that was flying landed in the Rishus HaYachid, then came out of the Rishus HaYachid and lands in the other Rishus Harabim. So according to Rebbe Yechayev, according to Rabbanan, once something is in the air, we don't consider it as if it's landed, as if it rested. Well, our Mishnah seems to go with the opinion of Rebbe that once something is in the air, we consider it as if it's resting. So would you say that Rebbe is the author of a Mishnah? Amalei. So Ula answered, Afila Tamer Rabbanim. You could say that our Mishnah goes according to Rabbanim, that normally in Masechta Shabbos, we don't consider something as if it's resting. Adkan like Kapliga Rabbana Leda Rebbe. They were only arguing against Rebbe Eli in Shabbos regarding halachas of Shabbos. Aval hacha, but over here by Gittin, Mishum the Interuhu, Vahokam Inter. The whole point of get is that it should be watched, and that it doesn't really have to land or in the chotzer, as long as it's in the airspace and it's not going to fly out of the chotzer and it's being watched and protected in the chotzer. That's enough. So again, in this picture, even if he threw it off the roof, even if you don't consider it as if it's landed on the floor of the chotzer, but the fact is it's within a tall wall around it, and it's being protected from the wind and the elements. So therefore, that is considered enough to make it a get, even while it's in the airspace, even according to Rabbanim. Rabbi Yasi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he's saying teretz, our Mishnah, the outer mechitza are greater than the inner mechitza. Amalei Rab Zera said to Rabasi, come on, who are you going to say the author of our Mishnah is? Kirebi, like Rebbe, the Amar who said, Kluta Kamisha Unkadamya, that something is in the air is as if it's rested. Amalei, so Rabbi Yochanan answered, Rabasi answered, I feel the time of the Rabban. Atkan like Kibli Rabban lay the Rebbe. When the Rabban argue on Rebbe, I love in Shabbos, only by Hilcha Shabbos. Of a Hacha over here, the whole point is Mishum Inturehu. We want to get that should be in a protected area, even if you don't consider it as if it's landed on the floor. I'll come inter, and at the end of the day, it's being watched. The Gemara said, Nimchak, when he threw it off the roof, even before it landed on the ground, if it got erased, and I imagine that while it flew off the roof, a sudden rain hit it and erased the get. Amar Rab Nachman, Amar Rabba Barvu, Loishana wasn't taught Elish Nimcha Derech Yirida, when it got erased as it was coming down. Aval Derech Aliyah, if it was the get was still flying upwards, the trajectory was upwards, so it's still considered connected to the husband. So then, Loi. In other words, when do you consider it? Look at this. If you could draw it out, when he throws it upwards, right? As long as it's in the upward direction, she's not mugureshes, because it's still considered his power that it's connected. The get is somewhat connected to the husband. As soon as it starts making a downward movement with the pull of gravity pulling it down, that's when we consider as if the woman is mugureshes. And that's why if in that area, if it got erased as it's coming down, or it got burnt, somehow a fireball came and hit it and burnt it, it's a good get. She's mugrashes. My timer, what's the reason? Mikara lav lemenach koy. When you throw it upwards, it's not heading towards a rest. It's going upwards. It's only when it makes the curve going downwards, that's when it's being rested. Nisraf, a fire came and burned it. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Abavu, Loishana was been taught, Ela Shekodim get ledleika, that there was no fire there in the airspace of the chotzer. Then you say if it got burnt on the way down, fine. If there was a fire, let's say imagine there was a fire somehow coming out of the windows over here of the house, and he threw the get. So then when it got burnt, even if it's on its way down, it wouldn't be a good get. Why time it? What's the reason? Because the fire existed before he threw the get. So therefore, he was almost like throwing it into the fire, and therefore it would not be considered a good get. Amar Rav Chizda is taught. Rishuyas chalukis begittin. That means there are different domains for a get. In other words, if a man says to his wife, "Okay, I own this chotzer, and I want you to get this get, so I'm giving you that wherever the get is going to land in my chotzer, that's considered yours for you to acquire the get. Even though it's my chotzer, I'm like giving it to you or loaning it to you for the time being, so you can get the get." But he only has in mind in the chotzer. Let's say he has bad aim. Instead of throwing it into the chotzer, it lands on the windowsill of his house. So then he wasn't thinking that he was going to lend her the windowsill. Therefore, if it lands somewhere else, she's not mugareses, because a person only lends one thing to the woman, but not two different locations. That's what he says. A reshuyas, the domains are divided by gittin, and a man only lends one domain to his wife, not two. Amalei Rami bar Chama l'Rava. So Rami bar Chama said to Rava, "Menale l'Savaha. How does your father-in-law know this?" Rava was the son-in-law of Rav Chizda, and Rava would call his father-in-law Saba. So Rabbi bar Chama said, "How would your father-in-law know? Where would your father-in-law know this idea?" Omalei masnisinis. Rava answered, "It's a Mishnah." The Mishnah says, "That's the first part of the Mishnah. If she was standing on the top of the roof and threw it to her, and he threw it to her because he was in the chotzer, as soon as it reached the airspace of the roof, she's bugrashas. But my askin, what are we talking about? Do you say bigagdi da, the chotzi dida? It's her roof and her chotzer. Lamali avi agad. Why do you have to wait till the airspace of the roof? If she owns the chotzer and owns the gag and the roof, and she owns the house, of course she's mugareshus even before he threw it. If the whole thing, the roof belonged to him and the chotzer belonged to him, so if it reached the airspace of the roof, why should she be mugareshus? She doesn't own the roof. It must be that the case where she is on the roof and he is in the chotzer, it means begagdi da. The roof belongs to her. Maybe she owns the house. The chotzer didei, and the courtyard belongs to him. So that's the beginning of the Mishnah. Let's take a look at the end of the Mishnah. Hu milmala v'hi milmata. He's on top and she's on the bottom. She's in the chotzer and he's on top of the roof of the house. Uzraka, and he threw it to her. As soon as it reaches the airspace of the chotzer, she's divorced. If it's talking about her roof and his roof, and his chotzer, if he owns the chotzer, my megreshus, why she's divorced? If she's standing in the chotzer, the whole chotzer belongs to him. You have to reverse it. That here in this end of the Mishnah, the roof belongs to him and the chotzer belongs to her. So, and therefore the chotzer belongs to her, and therefore as soon as it reaches the airspace of the chotzer, she's mugareshus. So Reisha, the beginning of the Mishnah, talks about a case, begagdi da, the roof is hers, v'chotzer didei, and the courtyard is his. Seifa, the end of the Mishnah is begagdi dei, v'chotzer dida. There's the roof his and the chotzer hers. So that it's very odd to say that the Mishnah is talking about two different cases. Elalav, we must say, da'ishlo makam. Really, the whole thing belongs to him, and he's lending her one space, and therefore, if she's on the roof, and so he's thinking that the only space I'm going to give her is the roof. And so if it lands in the chotzer, she wouldn't be megreshus. That the Mishnah is teaching you this idea that one place a man lends to his wife. 2 places a man does not lend to his wife. So if she's on the roof and he's on the bottom on the chatzir, so when he throws it to her, only if it lands in the roof, it's she's megarashis. But if it would land in the chatzir, she wouldn't be megarashis because he only lent her the space of the roof. So you see this same idea of that Rav Chisda taught us from the Mishnah, and that's what Rava said. Amalei. So Rami Bechama answered Rava, the area, it doesn't have to be so. You don't have to say that it's talking about all his. The Reisha could be talking about the roof is hers and the chatzah is his, and the end of the Mishnah is talking about the roof is his and the chatzah is hers, and you wouldn't have a proof to Rav Chisda's idea. Amar Rava said, Shalish midos begitten. There are 3 things different about a get than Shabbos. Listen up. New Gemara. Rebbe said, when everything is flying, it's as if we consider it as if it's rested. Upligi Rabbanim, and the Rabbanim would argue, they say by Hilchas Shabbos, if it's flying in the air and it crosses from one Rishus Rabbin to another Rishus Rabbin, even if a Rishus Yachid is in the middle, we don't consider it as if it landed Rishus Yachid and Yechayev, but we consider it, once it's flying, it's not as if it's resting. Hani milin Shabbos. That was only by Shabbos. The key point of a get, that it should be watched. So even the Rabbanan would consider, as long as something is in the airspace and it's being protected, the get is a good get. We saw this idea before. Another case, if a guy on Shabbos, he puts a big pole in the Rishus HaYachid, v'zarak v'noch al gabel, and somebody threw from the Rishus Rabbim and landed on top of a pole. So a man's walking on Queens Boulevard and somebody has a pole in his property and it's going very high in the air, and he threw, let's say, something and it landed on top of it. I feel like even if it's tall, like 100 amas, like 200 feet, chayev, because the fee Rishus Yachid because the Rishus Yachid goes to the sky, and therefore you threw from Rishus Rabbin from Queens Boulevard into the guy's domain, and it landed on a pole that's in his property. But Hani immediately in Shabbos, that's only by Shabbos. But let's say a guy put a big pole that's 200 feet in the air and threw the get, and it landed on top of the pole. She's not mugarashas because you can't watch the get from up there because it could easily be blown away. Mishum and Turi, by get, the point is, chatzir works if it can be protected. In such a case, loy minter, if it lands on top of the pole, it's not being protected. We go to Amid Beis. That Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel said, if you go on a roof, let's say in one of these, in Crown Heights or Brooklyn or whatever it is, where they have the attached houses, we said before that the halacha is that even though the houses are, they look one and the same in the front of the houses, the townhouses, but on the roofs, they're separated. So a person on Shabbos shouldn't stand on one roof and collect rain from the Gagai Shal Chaver, from his friend's roof, because they're considered like 2 different domains. And just like the houses are separated, milmata from the bottom, kach the yoren chaluk milmal. So therefore, on the roof, it's also considered as if, even though the roofs are flat and looks like all one house, but since inside in the houses, the townhouses, they're different houses. So therefore, the roofs are considered separate, and so you should be careful not to take water from the friend's roof and bring it over to yours. Shabbos. If a man owns a bunch of townhouses, and he says, I'm lending my wife the roof of the townhouse. He doesn't mean one particular roof from one townhouse. Even if it lands on the next neighboring townhouse, if he owns that townhouse, the entire roof is considered as one roof, and therefore she is going to be megrashis, because a person's not so makbid and person's not so pedantic when it comes to giving his wife roof. It doesn't make a difference if it's this roof or that roof. He wants to lend her a space where she can be kind of acquire her get. Nu Gemara, Amar Abaya said, you have 2 courtyards, one within each other. So this is the picture. You have 2 courtyards, one within each other. So the outer wall of the outer courtyard is bigger than the inner courtyard. Okay, so this is the picture. Okay, now the Gemara says, Panemius Shalah, if the inside belonged to her, The outer courtyard belonged to Shalai, his. And the outer walls of the outer courtyard is taller than the inner courtyard. And he threw it from his courtyard to her courtyard. As soon as it reached the airspace of her, not even the airspace, as long as he threw it from his courtyard, and I'm going to make the drawing over here. He threw it from here, and even if it didn't land into her within her walls, she's already mugureshes, because this outer wall, even though it's not protecting, it's like sort of like a extra protection for her inner courtyard, and she's going to be mugureshes. By time Panimi is Kufa, the inner courtyard is being protected by the outer walls, which are taller than the inner walls. Masha came bekupos. If you had this situation with baskets, you have a large basket, and inside is a smaller basket, and it's her basket is the smaller basket, and you threw it, and his is the outer basket, the tall big basket, and you threw it into the baskets, and you wanted to land into her into her baskets, which is in the middle there. You don't say as soon as it reaches the airspace of the outer basket, it's considered as if she's megreshes. If you have two baskets with each other, the inner one is hers, the outer one is his. So as soon as it reaches the airspace of the inside, even if it reaches even very close to the ground of the inside basket, my tama, the whole loin nach. For baskets, we don't say this concept of airspace. It has to be landing in the basket. As soon as something lands only on the floor, on the floor of the basket, then it's considered megureshes. But being in the airspace of the basket is not enough. V'chinach might have it. If it rested in the airspace, if it landed in the basket, so what? At the end of the day, her basket is within his basket, and Kalev Shalakech Brushus Meicherhu. It's the purchaser's kalim is in the domain of the meicher. In other words, if her basket is within his basket, how can we view her basket as a separate domain to acquire a get if it's within his basket? So the Gemara answers, here we're talking about the kupa she'ein lo shulayim. The outer basket has no floor to it, has no bottom to it. If it has no bottom to it, she's not really in his basket. She's really, the inner basket is just laying on the ground by itself, because there is no basket bottom for the outer one belonging to his. And that's why she could become Mugrashes. One more minute, we'll do the Mishnah. Beis Shammai Oimim. Beis Shammai says, Poiter Adam Ishta beget Yashin. If a man wrote a get, let's say in September, he wrote a get and he gives it to her in January. So he can use that get. What's wrong with that? Rabbi Beis Shammai says, Paita Adam beget Yashin. If he has an old get, he can use it. Or Beis Hillel Oisrin. Beis Hillel says, you shouldn't do that. That's not good. The Ezu get Yashin. What's called an old get? After he wrote it, he's still living with her. For example, he wrote it in September and he's still sleeping around with her. And then he says he finally gives it to her in January. Beis Hillel says that's not a good get. So we can explain why not. But my kami palgi, what's the argument? Beis Shammai says lo yamrim gzeira shem yomer gita l'kaydem l'vana, or Beis Hillel savik gzeira shem yomer gita kaydem l'vana. Here's a big problem that could happen. If she gets pregnant from between September and January, and they have a baby in March, right? If they have a baby in March, people are going to say that wait a second. They're going to look at the date of the get, and they're going to say the date of the get was in September. They'll think the get was given in September, and therefore this baby was born out of wedlock, and it'll be an insult to the baby. People are going to say it's a pagam on the baby. So the get was before the son, but really it's not true because he only gave the get in January. But since the date of the get is written September, people are going to think that they actually got divorced in September. And if there's a baby born soon after, they're going to say, oh, that people are going to say that actually after that the get came before the child, and there's something wrong with the child. Amar Abba Shmuel, if she got married with an old get, if even according to Beis Hillel, if she got married with this get, loy teitze, we don't force her to divorce the second guy. Even though Beis Hillel holds it's not a good get, but if she took it and had a rabbi that said it's okay, and she got married a second time, we say stay with the second marriage. Others say, Amar Rabba Mishmuel, not only that, not only if she got married a second time, in this Garsha, if she got divorced with this get, and the rabbi said, you're divorced, even if it's a get yashan, an old get, hinasi lechatchila, she could get married lechatchila. We won't require the husband to write a new get, even according to Beis Hillel. And so that ends this conversation of get yashan. And so we ended by the Ayin Tes Amid Beis by the Mishnah.
Thank you.
Okay.